So this is me leaving medical school to combat lifestyle-based illness with absolutely no training on lifestyle. So most of the people that I see, good, down-to-earth people, they genuinely believe red meat causes disease. They genuinely believe it contributes to cancer, heart disease, and this is how they've been conditioned. But they'll certainly be talking a lot more about vegetarianism and the environment and how our diet impacts on this. So they'll start it at a very, very early stage. Can doctors help us be healthy? Well, not really, because 70% of them are now either overweight or obese.
Most doctors haven't figured out that most of their degree is misinformation, and it's the reason why there's so much ill health these days.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about beef today, and as you can see from the title, it's what's the beef with beef? As there certainly seems to be a fair amount of controversy around what should be, I believe, an essential food. So to get into this, I think let's talk about the business of disease from the viewpoint of a gastroenterologist or a doctor. So to get disease, I'm fairly certain you need to disconnect farming from nature. When you do this, you have the rise of disease in human beings. This obviously requires pharmaceuticals. You then train a workforce of people like myself who are largely oblivious to the link. And this is probably should be a summary slide.
Doctor with a brain.
I'd start with this. Meat's been an essential part of the human diet.
It's not often that you find a doctor who is awake like that, actually a thinking, critical thinking person who's able to connect the dots and see the bigger picture. Most of them can't see the forest from the individual tree. So that's quite refreshing.
We cannot debate nor doubt this. Without it, the human brain certainly would not have developed. There are some that argue that seafood was also a critical part of our diet, and that's when the brain showed a massive explosion in size and complexity. But we've been eating meat.
Critical fatty acid, DHA, found lots of it is found in fish. So, yeah, he's right.
For millions of years. I don't think I need to justify that to anyone here. However, what has occurred? Let's look at what happened about 9,000 years ago. Something occurred that made us shift to farming grains and crops and vegetables. It came with many advantages. Like if you're going to build a civilization and not be a nomadic hunter-gatherer, you need a stable point. And civilization arose from farming. The two are interlinked. So civilization's given us math, it's given us legal code, it's given us religion, it's given us a lot of good things. But certainly 9,000 years ago, 9 to 10,000 years ago, we saw a decline in human health. Issues with dentition, our teeth, which often signify chronic inflammation. We've got a couple of dentists in the crowd today, so I'm sure they'll agree with this. We started seeing the rise of dental issues. We saw the rise of thinner bones. Our stature shrunk and our brain shrunk about 180 cc. So we potentially,
the human brain has shrank about 11% since the rise in agriculture and grains and carbohydrates. And also our jaw structure as well, which is, it's the elephant in the room when it comes to deformity of the teeth and everything else. Our jaw structure has changed because we're not using them the way we used to, chewing on meat, etc. And it's causing all this deformity.
If you think a larger brain constitutes more intelligence, which it does, we've become less intelligent in the agrarian revolution. So, I don't like the fact that we paint ancient man as a bit of a brute, because I suspect they were a lot more sophisticated than we think and give them credit for. So forget 9,000 years ago. Let's go to 30 to 80 years ago. We've now got industrial agriculture. We've got pesticides, hormones, mechanization, chemical manipulation of food, separation of forest and farm, fast foods, globalization, food out of season, genetic manipulation. So all of this has occurred within a century. And I suspect while it is increased yield of food, the quality of our food supply has certainly diminished significantly.
For sure.
This is a cracking slide. It's a 4,000-year-old Sumerian recipe book. 25 recipes in it. 21 are for meat and 4 are for vegetable stews. With the vegetable stews, a critical ingredient is animal fat. Okay, so you can see we've always valued animal-sourced foods. So, look, I'm a broken man. I think I've spent 20 years in the medical industry, and I've really been unhappy with the approach to healthcare. And I think the fact that we fail to acknowledge root cause has been a problem. This is a fantastic Upton Sinclair quote.
Well, I'll just quickly add there, the medical system is designed to treat the symptoms and not the cause. You know, we slap a bandage on it, metaphorically speaking, hoping that it's going to get rid of it, when actually it's a temporary fix most of the time, but it doesn't address the underlying issue. And, you know, you can argue 95% of most chronic diseases these days are because of diet and because of the lack of meat and fat in the diet.
I think you guys would have heard this before. You cannot make somebody understand something if their salary depends on them not understanding it. We are incentivized by disease, and I'll explain how in a few slides. So this is me leaving medical school to combat lifestyle-based illness with absolutely no training on lifestyle. What do the masses that I see, and these are highly educated people, you know, professional people, what do they think about red meat and health? What I've come to realize is that the crowd is fundamentally a gathering place where this madness begins. Insanity basically runs rampant. And within this asylum, the lunatics have basically gained control. Okay? So most of the people that I see, good, you know, down-to-earth people, they genuinely believe red meat causes disease. They genuinely believe it contributes to cancer, heart disease, and this is how they've been conditioned. The medical world, my world, we promote this and have done so for many decades. We are now seeing in the last few years a rise of plant-based doctors, and they are pushing these lifestyles onto patients. Like, I remember taking my 90-year-old grandmother to see the doctor, and, you know, like grandmothers being grandmothers, they don't want to listen to what their grandson's got to say. So I remember her asking her doctor, what diet do I need to go to eat to make sure that my body doesn't fall apart, because she was obviously developing fragility and frailty. And what she was told was a high-fiber diet. She died a brittle diabetic. It was very sad to see. Meat causes disease. That hasn't been my personal experience. That's my old man. He's a dentist, smart guy, followed the dietary guidelines from about 40 onwards, ate a lot of grain, minimized his meat intake, and was floridly diabetic by 50. When he moved from New Zealand to Australia to be with me, he was on insulin 4 times a day, three to 4 times a day, multiple medications, just didn't look well. That's him now. He's lost about 15 kilos of weight, and beef was a critical part of him being able to do this. It took him to surrender his ego to listen to his son, but he did. And it's been a fantastic recovery for him, and he's not on any medication.
Well, that's something right there. I speak more.
But this should be everyone's story. I think the human body is capable of self-healing, and the medical industry simply has taken it out of your hands.
He's absolutely right. The body is such an incredible machine, and we just need to get out of its way. And that's what a doctor should do, really. A doctor should get the patient out of its own way and allow the body to do what it needs to do. But, you know, we need to feed it the correct chemicals, substances in order for it to do that. But we're not doing that.
Let's take cancer as an example. It's a leading cause of death in Australia. It's increasing in, you know, prevalence and incidence. Rates are expected to increase by about 60% in the next 16 years. Enormous rise. And we're seeing more and more cancer in young, supposedly healthy people. Beef's been blamed, but you can see this graph.
I just want to add something to that as well. When I was 15, 16, I remember hearing the advert on the radio, something like, it was 1 in 5 people that get cancer. So I'm going back, 12 years or so, 12, 13 years. Now it's 1 in 2. It's just half of the population is apparently going to get cancer at some point. Scary.
1962 to 2015. This shows meat consumption in Australia. Poultry is drastically increasing, as you can see here in this orange line. Beef, actually, in the last maybe decade or so, the inputs or the intakes actually dropped off quite significantly. That's in 2015. 8 years down the track now, with inflation inflating beef to up to 40% above prices. Like, I'd like to see the beef intake now. I suspect it's dropped dramatically in these last 3 years as we've seen this financial crisis or debasement of currency reduce our purchasing power of beef. So where does this decision that meat and disease are synonymous come from? And to understand that, you have to look at a global body, a centralized body called the World Health Organization, and one of their sister arms, the IRAC, which is the International Agency for the
World Health Organization.
Cancer. 2015, these guys met up, a panel of 22 of them, 14 of which I believe were heavily plant-based, all of them self-nominated, all of them had spent their career trying to prove red meat caused cancer, all of them met up. Okay, and they determined cancer was a byproduct of red meat. There was one chap who wasn't on that path, where he wasn't plant-based or anything. He was more of an objective bloke. And he said it was the most frustrating day that he's ever experienced. My good friend Brian Sanders, you might know him as Food Lies. He's done an amazing podcast with this gentleman. And it's really quite revealing as to what happened on this day. They basically took 800 epidemiological studies in any fields of science. Epidemiology is the weakest level of evidence. 780 showed no link between processed meat and cancer, or red meat and cancer, showed no link. 780 of those 800 studies. But about a handful, 20 of them showed a possible link. So they focused on those 20 and discounted the 780. I'm not making this.
And that's what happens as well when people let ideology and wanting to prove their belief get in the way of real science and the truth. They cherry pick the data, they cherry pick all of the information to make it look as though their belief system, their ideology is the right one, it's the truth. And this happens in not just food, but all areas of science. It's worrying, man.
This is legitimate, okay, and it shows you the level of corruption. They looked at something called the absolute risk, and when you look at absolute risk, it doesn't look impressive. The lifetime absolute risk of bowel cancer in vegetarians is about 4.5 out of 100. In people eating 50 grams of processed meat every day for a lifetime, the risk is 5.3 out of 100. Okay, so this is the raw data. Absolute risk doesn't look all that impressive. They're not statistically distinguishable. And you can see it's slightly increased, but think about it. What sort of individual eats 50 grams of processed meat every day for a lifetime? Exactly. Probably the type of person who's eating pizzas, burgers, along with French fries, milkshakes, whatever. It Significant bias that comes into it. From true quality evidence, they extrapolated something called relative risk, which always looks more impressive than absolute risk. And the relative risk was 18% for those who ate processed meat. Now, somehow they extended that to red meat as well and came up with this blanket decision that processed and red meat causes cancer. But it's a circular argument because they only really looked at processed meat and only determined the numbers for processed meat. Let's compare this with other known carcinogens. We know that eating moldy grains contaminated with aflatoxin can cause liver cancer. Okay, we know this. We know smoking causes lung cancer. That's a no-brainer. Relative risk, not absolute risk, the relative risk of lung cancer from smoking is 3,000%. So that's what real risk looks like, not 18%, 3,000%. Relative risk for liver cancer from eating moldy grains contaminated with aflatoxin, about 600%. You compare that to the piddly 18% that the World Health Organization was able to determine from epidemiological studies in people eating processed meat every day. So you can see that there has been a significant hit job on red meat from the World Health Organization. We can extract, we can.
But it's not processed meat though, is it? It's processed food that contains crappy meat. That's what it is, right? It's processed shitty food, junk food that has strips of like processed meat in it, doner kebabs, that kind of stuff. It's not real meat. And that's what he's saying, by the way, but I'm just making it a bit more clearer.
Talk about why that is, and that's probably outside the scope of my talk. But to me, that's a sinister decision because it's been implemented by basically every health system globally because they're a centralized body. That's what the World Health Organization is. In fields outside nutrition, the usual threshold for confidence about 200 to 400% for you to be guardedly confident. So today's standard calls after that World Health Organization analysis for something called a systematic review of meta-analysis. They never did any of that. In fact, there were randomized control trials, which are a higher quality of evidence, which were completely ignored by the World Health Organization. Instead, what we got were groups like Cancer Council. I mean, you can see it right down at the bottom there. Increase high-fiber foods, improve your diet by eating more whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, and less processed and red meat. So basically, Jacob's grass-fed, finished, regeneratively farmed beef is on that hit list of poor quality eating, according to the Cancer Council. All stems from the World Health Organization decision. You know, we got Bowel Cancer Australia promoting meat-free week. We got Cancer Council telling parents not to pack ham for their kids, you know, to ditch the ham sandwich. We've got people like Billy Gates telling governments that we should shift to synthetic beef and a more plant-based method of eating. And that, like, to write someone like Bill Gates off would be foolish because they wield a huge amount of influence through bodies like the World Health Organization. His foundation is one of the biggest contributors to the World Health Organization budget. Not only is it a health issue now, it's a climate issue. It's imperative for survival unless we become plant-based, according to most of these headlines. Climate-friendly diets make a huge difference, even if you don't go all out vegan. So basically, they're pushing people from an environmental and health perspective towards a plant-based life. And now they'll start with our kids. The curriculum is about to change. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but they'll certainly be talking a lot more about vegetarianism and the environment and how our diet impacts on this. So they'll start it at a very, very early stage.
Notice something here, right? We've never, in the history of humankind, needed a marketing campaign or propaganda or education to eat meat. It was natural because we've done it for millions of years. It's what we've evolved doing. Notice how we need marketing, advertising, and headlines and propaganda and education to eat plant-based, right? To give up meat, to think that meat causes problems and that eating a high-fiber, high-carbohydrate diet is the way forward, right?
So we'll essentially have a generation growing up believing that beef not only causes disease, but it is wrecking the environment.
If it needs a marketing campaign, you don't need it in your life. Simple as that.
So one thing I tweeted a while ago is imagine launching a war against red meat in a world awash with ultra-processed foods, packeted foods, and sugar-sweetened beverages. Like, there's not really a focus on that, is there? It's a big, big focus on beef. Can doctors help us be healthy? Well, not really, because 70% of them are now either overweight or obese. And we have very little nutritional training, as I alluded to before. Most don't value movement, very few exercise. It's a difficult job, high-stress job, a lot of hours, high remuneration. The opportunity cost for 2 or an hour and a half of exercise is income lost. And it's one of those fields where they prioritize the job over their own health. I mean, you got clowns like this guy, the cardiologist who prescribes red wine, claiming that it can have a heart attack. I mean, this is just absolute rubbish. But
not all doctors are made equally, unfortunately. Most of them just haven't got a clue. They can't connect the dots. Most doctors haven't figured out that most of their degree is misinformation, and it's the reason why there's so much ill health these days.
Meat is painted as a villain. This is quite sinister. This was just a few weeks ago. You guys might have seen it on social media, but Dr. Stanford's an obesity doctor and a contributor to the US 2025 dietary guidelines. She claims diet and exercise have little to no impact on obesity. She says the number one cause of it is genetics. And this is misleading. When you place a person under environmental duress, there are these things called your mitochondria, and without going into too much depth, but mitochondrial dysfunction probably relates to most diseases that we see. These mitochondria release components, reactive oxygen species and free radicals and whatnot, that modify your DNA. And this DNA is then passed on to the kids. It's intergenerational. This is a concept known as epigenetics. So obesity isn't genetic. Obesity is very much epigenetic, and it stems from the parents. So a child born to parents that are potentially overweight or obese is on the back foot because of epigenetics, but epigenetics can always be modified. Your environment will always be able to modify it. So really, the pursuit of health is no longer in the hands of the individual. When you've got our drinking water and food compromises, it's the responsibility of society, the collective. And a lot of what Texas Slim said really resonated with me. It is really all our responsibility. Great quote by Rachel Carlson. She says, I won't read the whole thing, but just the first line, the most alarming of all man's assaults is upon the environment. It's the contamination of air, earth, rivers, and seas with dangerous and even lethal materials. I point this out to my colleagues. I speak at medical conferences. I'm not invited to many medical conferences anymore. But when I used to, the consensus was that fundamentally that I was a conspiracy theorist or someone who's very ultra right wing. I mean, I don't know what my political beliefs have to do with anything. I was just simply pointing out food and our health is intimately connected. To understand the business of disease, we have to understand something called the military-industrial complex, okay? And you might wonder why I'm talking about it, but this will make sense. So in America, you've got Congress, which provides tax funding to the Department of Defense. They then issue tax-funded contracts to large military corporations like Raytheon or Lockheed Martin. They then provide campaign contributions to Congress, which then provide tax funding, and so that cycle continues. That is the military-industrial complex aided by something called lobbying. Now, 2022 alone has seen revenue in this business up $20 billion. Won't go into the reasons why, but I think most of us know that war is good business at the moment. President Eisenhower, when he departed, his departing speech warned of this. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is the new American experience, he said. In councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Is there a similar complex in healthcare? There is. It's the triad, the toxic triad, known as big food, big pharma, and the medical industrial complex. The business of disease. Competition is a sin, according to John D. Rockefeller, the father of modern medicine. But before Rockefeller unified all the medical universities in America, American medicine was a jumble of competing philosophies. They're all in open conflict with each other. As George Washington lay dying, President George Washington lay dying, physicians from Yale and Harvard proceeded to kill him by draining his blood, putting leeches on him, and injecting him with mercury subchloride. So this was the standard of medicine. So what John D. Rockefeller did was he was going to standardize it. So they came up with a standard curriculum, okay? And allopathic medicine was born. That's the field that I'm trained in. Allopathic medicine is, don't get me wrong, it's given us some amazing things. CT, antibiotics, MRIs, like it's great in acute medicine. But as allopathic doctors, and, there's a few medical...
Yeah, I agree with what he says there. Like, modern day medicine is good for diagnosing an issue, right? Because they have great technology. They can see inside the body. They can see what's going on, blood tests, etc. But in terms of actual treatment and curing disease, when was the last time you ever heard of somebody from the medical industry curing somebody of their diabetes or their Alzheimer's or their arthritis or whatever? It It doesn't happen. They're on their meds for 20, 25 years plus, and then they die. They don't cure disease. They just treat symptoms. And it's a business model. It's a very effective business model as well.
Doctors in here that I can vouch for the fact that alternative systems of health, nutrition, lifestyle, exercise, sleep, all of that was removed from our curriculum. So fundamentally, we are born rebirth through these university degrees, believing that disease is essentially a drug deficiency, which is an absolute bizarre state of mind.
How strange. I mean, when you really take a step back for a moment and just look and observe the entire industry as a whole, what's it really doing? It's making a shit ton of money. It's designed to keep people on a Ferris wheel, to keep people sick. You can't profit off healthy people. The pharmaceutical industry know this. Governments know this, which is why they're in bed with each other, right? Health is actually very simple. Although it's made out to be this really complex thing, and there's loads of science and data and all these tiny little details, and nobody can see the forest from the individual tree because of it, because everyone's heads is down in the weeds and they're so confused. And then we give up responsibility. We go, right, sod it. The experts can handle it. They know best. And then they give us what they want, right? And this is what we have right now. People are sicker and fatter than ever before. The truth is, we just need to eat lots of meat and fat, okay? Lots of red meat and fat and eggs, animal products, like we've always done for millions of years, and health will become a normality. But I absolutely love this guy. He's fantastic. And I hope he does more presentations like this, because what he said there is so powerful. It's so simple to understand. And he's pointing out the truth. He's clearly not afraid to speak his mind and speak the truth as well. So, full credit to him. This is part 1, by the way, so I'll do part 2 coming up very soon. And then in part 2, I'll link the full presentation by him. But, if you're hearing something like this for the first time, we're thinking, right, meat causes problems, right? It's very bad for our health. Well, I challenge you, go 30 days and eat meat. Give up vegetables and carbs and fruits. Eat meat and fat for 30 days and tell me how you feel. Okay? Even go 90 days, because 30 days you might experience some changes in your body, which might make you feel a little bit crap. 90 days, though, is enough time to experience the benefits. I've been carnivore now, red meats and fats and eggs, animal products, for, a little over 7 months. I'm in the best physical condition and health condition I've ever been in my entire life. Nothing is ever going to change. I'm never going back to it. This is how we're supposed to live. It's clear as day to me now. But I hope that was interesting for you. I hope you learned something new there. I'm going to do more videos just like this. But keep an eye out for part 2 on this guy, because he is awesome. Yeah, let's speak soon.